All right, Jordan, I'm just getting ready to get eScribe rolling, so give me just 1 second here.
Okay, thanks. I had a technical delay on my end too, so I need a couple minutes as well.
All right, we are ready on eScribe as well, so you are good to go.
Okay, thanks. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call the Land Use and Planning Committee for March 30th to order. Our first order of business is roll call. Amanda, can you call the roll?
Yes. Anderson. Absent. Becerra.
Present.
Carlino. Contos. I see him, but he's muted. Hess.
Present.
Jones.
Present.
Jordan.
Present.
Nugent.
Present.
Savage.
Present.
Cheryl.
Present.
Vasika.
Present.
And West.
Present.
All right, you do have a quorum.
Okay, thanks. We have minutes to approve from the meeting on March 9th. Are there changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will be approved. We can move on now to public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anyone who would like to comment on a non-agenda item? If you're here for the Greeno Heights subdivision, we'll take that in a few minutes. Okay, seeing none, we can move on to our regular committee business. We have one item today. This is a pre-public hearing. And this is the Greeno Heights major subdivision and rezoning off Greeno Drive. We have Dave DeGrandpré here for a staff report. Looks like we have members of the applicant team and perhaps members of the public here. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to Dave for a staff report, and then we'll move to the applicant team if they would like to add anything or present anything. And then we'll do some questions from the committee. And then we'll go to public comment and we'll come back to additional questions. Just as a reminder, this is a pre-public hearing, so this is not an appropriate time to express an opinion until after the public hearing has concluded and we've had the opportunity to hear in a formal manner from members of the public. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Jordan. Good morning, councilors. I'm Dave DeGrandpré with CPDI, and would like to present to you the Greeno Heights subdivision and rezoning project. As Jordan mentioned, this is an informational item today. Monday night will be the public hearing, Monday at 6. And then next Wednesday, we will also have an opportunity to go over this project again if there are additional questions, comments that came up in the public hearing process, additional items that need to be discussed. And then final consideration is scheduled for the 11th. So the Greeno Heights subdivision property is located at the hill when you're coming from downtown, headed up Greeno Drive. It is, the map here shows that it's densely vegetated here along the southwestern portion. This is a little gulch. there's a drainage that comes down off the hillside from above. This is a gulch with a stream that feeds into Rattlesnake Creek. Greeno Park is located adjacent to the property to the south. Surrounding land uses are primarily single-family residences to the north and south of the property, and also apartments and open space. The site itself has a fair amount of topographic change from the northernmost point down to probably the southernmost point. There's about 50 feet total in elevation. It's fairly mild here in the center, as I'll show you on a slope map here shortly, but it's an open meadow here in the meadow. And then this is the drainage that I showed earlier that's densely vegetated. There's a home, or there's a man-made driveway that's right here, comes down to an older barn, an outbuilding. And then there's an old home right here on the southern boundary. And these are proposed to be removed as a portion of this as the subdivision is developed. The top image is looking from Greeno Drive onto the property. You can see the driveway. It slopes a little bit off to the south. It was kind of built up in order to make the driveway, and then slopes steeply down here off the other side. The home would be located over here. Can't quite see it. And then this is looking in the opposite direction. This is looking at the apartments across Greeno Drive, and this is kind of the open meadow right in the center. And here's a view on the right-hand side. Lower right-hand side is looking across the valley. Mount Sentinel would be here on your left. Through the trees, and here would be the kind of the Missoula Valley with the South Hills located off in the distance. On the left is the existing home located right up against the southern boundary overlooking Greeno Park. And the right is the garage. This is kind of the end of the driveway, the garage and barn that's located there. So this is the subdivision plat, the preliminary plat. And it shows 20 residential lots that are proposed to be created, as well as a 27,000 plus acre open space that contains the creek and the dense kind of vegetation, the big beautiful ponderosa pines and things like that. The lots range in size. Well, the property itself is 5.79 acres. The lots range in size from 6,670 feet to 9,617 feet. And the total density would be 3.87 dwelling units per acre after subtracting out the open space, 3.87 dwelling units per acre. The proposal includes dedicating additional right-of-way for Greeno Drive. So currently, Greeno Drive is located within a 30-foot easement. And so within that easement, which is quite narrow, the road takes up most of it. The road and the shoulders take up almost all of it. The developer is proposing to meet the city standards. A road like this is considered an urban collector, and that typically would have an 80-foot right-of-way. And so the road right now is contained in a 30-foot easement. And so the developer is responsible under our subdivision regulations for bringing the road up to city standards along the portion of the subdivision property. And so the developer is proposing to dedicate right-of-way that would equal 40 feet from the center line of the road. So in the hatched area, along Greeno, this is where the subdivider is proposing to dedicate additional right-of-way. Within that right-of-way, the subdivider is proposing to build additional pavement, curb, gutter, sidewalk, and then on most of it, a separate boulevard that would run along the street. I'll get into that in a little more detail here in a little bit. So those are kind of the Greeno Drive improvements. Within the subdivision, the subdivider is proposing a new road, local residential street, and also an alley to access all of the lots. As you can see, it's a loop road. The northern entrance on Greeno would align with Peggio Lane, which leads up to the apartments. And there would be there's a sidewalk that comes down from Peggio and a sidewalk here. And one of the conditions of approval is to require a crosswalk between the two. And I'm very happy to report that the subdivision road is proposed to meet all of the city's standards for width, for grade, for parking, for curb, gutter, sidewalk, etc. So that's kind of nice to see. And then councilors, during the presentation at any time, feel free to interrupt me if you have questions on a particular item. But I'll also try to keep it moving so that I see a couple of hands.
Okay, so we do have a couple questions, Dave. So we can go to Daniel Carlino first. Daniel?
Thanks. I was wondering, So since this is quite the busy street on Greeno, when we're building out the city like this with new developments, I think it's a really good opportunity to look into multimodal transportation by having a protected bike lane here. A lot of people go even just to the short portion up to go up to Waterworks Hill there. And then also for the new development for people, if this happened, like people that would potentially live there would have a safe way to bike there. And I'm just curious, like if we've looked into that in this plan, having a protected bike lane along with the sidewalk.
Yes, we have looked into that. So Greeno Drive is under the Missoula Long Range Transportation Plan. Greeno Drive is it's a project that's called out as a complete street. So it's a project that is kind of on the books for bike lanes, for sidewalks, and other improvements, intersection improvements too. At this point, the project has not been funded, and I'm not sure when it will be improved, but it's certainly proposed. And in this case, the developer is being required and is willing to dedicate additional right-of-way for complete street improvements, as well as install sidewalks along the subdivision property and some additional pavement in addition to that for a protected bike lane at some point in the future.
Thanks, Dave. I've got Gwen Jones next and then Amber.
Great, thanks. Good morning, Dave. I actually had several questions on what you hit right at the beginning of the presentation. So I'm just going to launch into them. I wanted to first of all ask you about the sidewalk, curbside sidewalk that is proposed just adjacent to the drainage area. It looks like there's boulevard for a chunk, and then it goes to curbside sidewalk. And my understanding is it's a very steep area, so there's just no breathing room there. There's no room to create a boulevard and a sidewalk. So I understand the rationale for a curbside sidewalk. However, is it 5 feet wide that's recommended? And if so, I'm wondering if you would chew on maybe making it 6 feet or a little bit wider, that's a fast road. And it's so uncomfortable walking next to cars that are going whizzing by. Is there any way to just buffer it a little bit more simply by widening the sidewalk a little bit more?
Yes, in fact, that's exactly what's proposed. So to make it clear for counselors and the public, Missoula city standards it's typically, there is a 5-foot sidewalk and it's separated from the travel lane by a boulevard. And so that's proposed along almost the entire length of the subdivision, except along the steep area where there's a street side sidewalk that's proposed, and that's based on the topography, as you mentioned. I'll show you a graphic here in just a second, based on the topography. So that's actually one of the variance requests, is to have a street side sidewalk, and it's proposed to be 6 feet instead of 5. Okay. So I'm going to zoom ahead here and show you what that might look like. This is a close-up showing that area. Again, you'd have boulevard and then a sidewalk along almost all the property, except for this about 75-foot stretch where the 6-foot sidewalk would be up against the curb. And let me go, and so let's see, next sheet, I think. I'll find it, I promise. This is what it would look like along Cherry Gulch. And so there would be an additional 4 feet of travel lane. So that's the 75-foot stretch that you were pointing out. Curb and gutter, 6-foot wide sidewalk. Then there'd be a guardrail and then a retaining wall. So I think that's exactly what you were getting at. Yeah, this is another picture of it. But this is looking toward Cherry Gulch right now. You can see there's a well-traveled path behind this guardrail. That's where I think runners, walkers, bicyclists sometimes go to get away from the traffic. And so it would be a pretty substantial improvement actually along this stretch. But really the request is to vary from the city standards, and it's because of this topography.
Great, thanks. Follow up, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead, Gwen.
Great. So thanks for that information. I read a lot of stuff, but I had not caught that it was going from 5 to 6 feet for that sidewalk. So that makes me feel better about that. If you can go back to the slide we were on originally, kind of looking at the plan for the whole area, I had another question. So when I read the notes from the planning board, there was discussion about having it be a one-way through this subdivision instead of a two-way street. And I just wanted to flesh out your thoughts on that. As it stands right now, it sounds like it is meeting our complete streets policy, if you said that, on this road A that goes through the subdivision. What are your thoughts on a one-way? Would that be beneficial in any way? Also considering that Greeno Drive is a fast road with, I think on this southern part, kind of limited visibility where you do pull out onto it. So what do you think about that, Dave? Just tell us your thoughts.
Well, okay. First, there's a disclaimer, and that is that I'm not an expert in transportation or transportation planning, but I've been a planner for a while. So I think the planning board was kind of spitballing, was thinking about, could we make a narrower street? Could we, are there different ways to achieve kind of the same goal where we might have less impervious surface, less runoff, maybe, like you said, maybe come up with put the road or the entrance to the road where there's the greatest sight distance when you're going to be leaving the property, things like that. So I would have to defer to some other city staff members from the Public Works and Mobility Department to talk pros and cons. But one thing I can tell you is we don't have, in our subdivision regulations, we have certain types of streets, certain cross sections, widths of roads and things like that that are allowed under certain circumstances, meaning given the amount of traffic. And so we don't really have a one-way street that's allowed in subdivisions, in our subdivision regulations. So the subdivider would have to ask for a variance from the subdivision regulations. A variance is properly granted when there are conditions that are unique to the property that result in a hardship that make the variance necessary. So in this case, there isn't really a hardship. There isn't, the developer didn't ask for a variance. I don't really know whether it would be better or worse, honestly. I'm not probably qualified to mention that, but the developer's following the rules. And so that's nice to see.
Right. One last follow-up, Jordan.
Yep, go ahead.
So thanks for that. And I think it might just merit a little bit more inquiry before we hear this in council, because it might be a win-win. I guess that's what I was thinking. If there's better, safer access, like if onto Greeno Drive, which is just a fast, well-traveled street, and if there's less runoff, and if it actually works better for the developer, and if it's a narrower street so that it's slower in order to accommodate a one-way, it just seems like all of that's a win-win, and I'd just be interested in that. So I'm going to put that out there as maybe something, Dave, if you could make a few inquiries on that. I understand we're following the rules, which is great, but maybe we can do a little bit better. So that was my thought on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I've got Amber and Heidi queued up for questions. I think we have a fair amount of presentation left, and so if you two are okay with holding your questions, I'd like to go back to Dave and get through the staff report, and then come back to questions.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I'll motor through it. I have to leave right at 10:45 also, so want to get through it and give everyone the opportunity to answer or ask questions as well as the public. But I did just fairly briefly. So this is the growth policy map. The recommendation is residential, medium density, 3 to 11 units per acre. There is a little bit of parks. I think this is kind of a buffer along Greeno. It's also on the growth policy map. I guess really the take home here, though, is the proposal does comply with this recommendation because the density would be 3.87 dwelling units per acre after subtracting the open space. So we're in general compliance with the growth policy. This is a peculiarity of the property. The property has 2 zoning districts on it right now. It has an R8 residential and an OP1. So OP1 is natural resource protection, open space. Frankly, I'm not sure how this got here. It looks like kind of a buffer maybe for the park. But the peculiar thing about a situation like this is under Title 20, our zoning rules, when a property is split zone, it has 2 zoning designations, the stricter applies. And so in this case, OP1 is stricter. And so it wouldn't allow development of these residential lots if the zone change doesn't happen. It would basically, the property couldn't be developed for subdivision type purposes. The existing use would go there. Again, the stricter applies is the rule in split zoned areas. So the owner is proposing to essentially realign the zoning to still have R8 and still have OP1. The OP1, the open space designation, would be on this parkland area or open space. The parkland is proposed to be dedicated to the city, and city parks and rec officials have have stated they would like to manage it in a natural state. It's, it contains a stream, riparian vegetation, is a wildlife corridor, and that sort of thing. So the result would be that the lots would be zoned appropriately, R8, as well as the open space would be zoned as OP1. I can kind of go through this pretty quick. There are some productive soils on the property. This section, it's actually the steeper section of the property, is considered farmland of local importance, but the property hasn't been farmed, isn't farmed, doesn't contain any irrigation facilities. So the finding in the staff report is that there is not a significant impact on agriculture or agricultural water user facilities. City services would be provided to all the lots, city water, city sewer. There are preliminary designs. To do that, the developers work closely with, or the developer's engineer, IMEG, has worked closely with our Public Works and Mobility Department to address those issues. And no other adverse impacts have been identified to local services, including solid waste, schools, law enforcement, etc. This is the parkland area that I mentioned. Under our city subdivision regulations, the amount of parkland that must be dedicated in a residential subdivision is based on the size of the lots. In this case, because the lots are less than half an acre in size, it'd be 11% of the net lotted area, they call it. So the area in lots. 17,000 square feet of open space is required to be dedicated, or parkland is required to be dedicated. This area consists of over 27,000 square feet of open space, so it exceeds our requirements, which is kind of nice because there are some really nice old trees, along this area. This parkland, I think, is valuable in terms of natural features, water quality protection, habitat, etc. We've talked about this a little bit already. I just wanted to kind of point out the additional right-of-way. This is along Greeno Drive, additional right-of-way. The developers, this here on the bottom shows a 30-foot easement, and proposed improvements the developer would make along the property include 4 feet of additional pavement, curb and gutter, 7-foot boulevard, and 5-foot sidewalk along the majority of it, except along the stretch above Cherry Creek that we talked about earlier. This is just a cross section of the road. Again, it meets city standards. It's got a 70-foot right of way, 35 feet from back of curb to back of curb, with travel lanes, parking lanes, curb gutter, sidewalk, boulevard, etc. So this is a peculiarity of the property that I wanted to point out that I'm sure we'll discuss. There is sidewalk that comes up Greeno Drive from town, but it only goes up to a certain point, then it ends. And people have made an informal trail that I showed you earlier. It's about 760 feet between the end of the sidewalk and the edge of the property. And so we at the staff level have been kind of thinking about, well, is the developer responsible for providing additional sidewalk? Is there something that we can do? And so we debated it a fair amount. Ultimately, we decided that because this is scheduled, look, you're talking with Aaron Wilson from the NPO, he's the lead transportation planner for the city. Greeno Drive is, again, a 30-foot easement. If we were to require some sort of sidewalk right now, that could really hamstring future complete street improvements. So that's kind of one knock against that idea. The other is really, I think it would be, when we require off-site improvements from a developer, there are really two tests. Gwen, you're probably familiar with this. The tests are the improvements made necessary by the subdivision? Number one. Number two, are the costs proportional, or is the impact proportional to the need made necessary by the subdivision? So in this case, that would be a very expensive stretch. There's already a need today. It's not like the subdivision might make it worse, or the need greater, I should say, but isn't causing the need in the first place. And I guess we at the city, or the CPDI, found that it would be a disproportionate taking or a disproportionate exaction from the developer. So we're not requiring, or not suggesting that we require that additional sidewalk to be paid by this one developer, but there is a plan to improve, or at least a project to improve this road. And so if we require a waiver of the right to protest those improvements, which is condition number 6, then future lot owners would essentially have to, if a district is set up, a funding district is set up to make these complete street improvements, these lot owners would have to participate in that. So I know that's a lot of words. You may have questions on that, but maybe at the end we can talk about it. Grading and drainage is an issue. There are some steep slopes on the property. The developer needs to make lots that are all developable. So there's going to be some significant grading. There is a geotechnical report that was a preliminary report that was included in the application. And it basically recommends additional investigation, that there be a mass grading plan that's put together by the project engineer, reviewed and approved by the geotechnical engineer, which is a separate firm, and that when the lots are developed, that they all also undergo geotechnical kind of planning and evaluation and sign off at the end. Basically, we want to make sure that water is managed appropriately, the site is graded appropriately, water is managed appropriately so it doesn't undermine any future construction, and also that erosion controls and things like that are put in place to protect water quality and those sorts of things. Kind of went through this already. So there are a couple of variances, and one has to do with slopes. So under our subdivision regulations, each lot as it stands today, so pre-grading, has to have at least 2,000 square feet of contiguous area that's less than 25% slope and outside of the setbacks. This is a slope map that you see. So the yellow color shows slopes between 0 and 15%. So that's fairly mild. Then the green area is 15 to 20%. Blue area is 20 to 25. So under our subdivision regulations, those are all considered buildable. But when you hit red, so anything above 25% is when kind of your ears prick up, or red flags go up. And so you can see this driveway coming in, and these two lots, 19 and 20, do not currently have 2,000 square feet of slopes less than 25% outside of the setbacks. So the developer is requesting a variance to create these two lots with those conditions. The driveway that comes in, shown in yellow here, maybe it's probably hard to see from your screens, but the driveway comes in and you can see on both sides of it, there's that red area. And so there was just basically, the driveway was built up high and slopes come off it. That's a steeper area. When the driveway is removed, building sites can be created. And also the geotechnical requirement is in place as well. So with staff level felt that variance was warranted. It was probably better to create these lots than not. There was some planning board discussion about, potentially a concept of including some of this area, at least within the park, and maybe having some greater density elsewhere. But that was just kind of discussion. And this is the plan that's on the table today. So staff is recommending approval of the variance because we think it can be appropriately mitigated. And then this is the second variance. We've kind of talked about it already. This has to do with the street side sidewalk, as opposed to having the sidewalk separated from the street. And again, it's based on conditions, we think conditions unique to the property. It's a steep slope. If we were to have an additional boulevard there, it would just result in pushing greater disturbance to the slope, to the stream, and that sort of thing. So it just doesn't seem necessary. Certainly a better situation with this sidewalk along that creek or along that drainage than exists today. It's better than just having this this small footpath along the side. So we think it's an improvement, and we think a variance is warranted because it's a condition that's unique to the property. It seems to make sense. So recommended motions are for approval of the rezoning, approval of 2 variances, and then approval of the 20-lot subdivision. There was planning board discussion. The planning board was unanimous in their recommendation for all 4 of those. They met last Wednesday night, held a public hearing, and unanimous recommendations of approval. There was, so the biggest public comment that we received, and also the biggest point of discussion from the planning board, was about Greeno Drive itself. That there's a lot of traffic on it. There aren't great pedestrian or bike facilities on most of it. And, things like intersection site distances and those sorts of things. There's a Lower Rattlesnake Transportation Committee that's also doing that provided some really great comments, extensive comments, and they're in your packet or they're available through eScribe. Another discussion that we had, try not to belabor it here, but it's something that I think it's important for council to consider, not so much on a case-by-case or development-by-development basis, but the concept. And that is, when we have a new development, should we have complete streets? Should we have everything in place already? Or should it be done in conjunction with the development? Or can we build out, can we approve projects, knowing that at some point in the future, we can develop a funding district to help make those improvements. So it was the idea of, they call it in planning circles, concurrency. Do the facilities need to be in place concurrent with development, or can they follow it up at some point in the future? So anyway, that's a bigger picture discussion, not so much case by case, but in any event. And other comments from the board, good discussion, but ultimately they recommended approval again of the zoning, the subdivision, and the 2 variances. It was unanimous. We have not had any, this is a rezoning, so some of you are familiar with the zoning protest provisions, and that is if we receive protest from 25% of the lots or living units within 150 feet of the property, then it raises the bar for council to change the zoning. It requires 2/3 majority to change the zoning. In this case, we have no protest of the rezoning at this point, so this provision wouldn't apply. But if we do get protests, I'll probably come back to this at the public hearing and then next week at LUP. So that concludes my presentation for now, but I'd welcome any questions.
Dave, on this slide, you have showing 15 valid protest petitions submitted, but that's in actuality, we haven't received any. That's correct?
Yeah, my face is turning red. I'm embarrassed.
That's
I
okay.
cut this from another presentation where we did have protests. Sorry, I didn't edit it appropriately.
No, I just wanted to clarify. Thanks
Yeah.
for that. Okay, so question queue, I've got Amber first and then Heidi next.
Yes, thanks. And can you guys hear me okay? I'm having some internet issues. Okay, I'll turn my camera off if needed. Jordan, I have I guess a comment and a request and then a couple of questions. Is that okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. So, I think my initial reaction was similar to the planning board as well as Daniel and Gwen's kind of thinking about the traffic and thinking about the traffic on Greeno. And I'm wondering if at some point we could get Aaron Wilson to weigh in on kind of traffic calming strategies on Greeno. I don't know if I don't know what's been done up there. I definitely know that it's a fast street, but I don't remember what the speed limit is. But I do find myself accidentally speeding on it with some regularity, and I don't. Yeah, so just thoughts on that. Kind of, I'd love to hear what Aaron has to say about what we could do with traffic calming as this goes forward. And I did see on your slide 17, the mitigation for the water quality, and erosion and such. And so that's great. And I know you always think that all through. I'm wondering, during construction, which is really when you get a lot of the erosion, what additional factors with that kind of sloping being so close to the creek, like what additional mitigation is going to be required? How do construction's a big concern for me for the water quality piece.
Yeah, I agree, particularly because there'll have to be significant grading on the site that will expose soil that has the potential to erode. So in a project like this, the developer is required to come up with a mitigation plan, essentially, a grading and drainage plan that includes erosion controls and best management practices. That's reviewed and approved by city and state officials, so Public Works and Mobility. And then there are inspections to make sure that the best management practices, so things like, let's see, some physical barriers to prevent erosion, to prevent soil from going, downhill into the stream. So like fencing, things, silt fencing. Another requirement is that as soon as the site is ready to, or as soon as regrading is done, that revegetation occurs. So there's planting that can take root quickly. And so the city, one of the questions that I had for our stormwater folks was whether there is actually inspection. Do we make sure that the plan is implemented? And they assured me, yes, that we do. We go out and we have people that go out and inspect the site, make sure that the erosion controls, the reseeding, all those things are implemented according to plan.
Great, thank you. That was my next going to be another question. Are we monitoring what they're doing with that? Because that would be a huge issue. And then I guess my last question is about access to the park through the dedicated open space. Is that just going to be, for runoff, or is there going to be any trail there? What are the plans around that?
So Parks and Rec throughout this whole process has been kind of consulting with the developer. Originally, there was a plan. The developer proposed a plan to put a trail in there that would link this, link the park to the top of the hill, the subdivision. Parks and Rec, though, asked that be removed, that this be managed as a natural area, essentially, that there isn't physical access. My feeling, though, is, and the planning board's feeling actually, was that it may happen anyway, that people may kind of develop their own footpath. And I think that Parks and Rec is probably aware of that and would monitor it and take action accordingly. But, we've certainly kicked around the idea of having a trail in there, an intentional one anyway. But I guess given the sensitivity of the area, the water quality concerns and wildlife and stuff like that, they just figured it would be better managed naturally, at least for the time being.
Okay, thanks. Heidi and then Jennifer.
So I think Amber just got my first question, which was around stormwater management. But I have a couple more. So one is, I know we've had significant issues with lot encroachment on Greeno Park. And I guess, is there maybe a plan in place to prevent that from happening here? Obviously, that's not at the time of construction or anything, but more in in the future after maybe these lots sell a few times. Or is it pretty obvious? I know it's pretty steep back here, so maybe it's really obvious where lots end and where that slope starts. So
No, I don't think it is obvious along the whole length of the property, because the slope does vary. It certainly drops off quite a bit. I don't know if you can really see these contour lines, but it's still fairly flat in here on Greeno Park area. There's no plan for fencing at this time to fence off those lots, but maybe IMEG, the developer's representative, could answer that better than I do, because I don't know their plans exactly.
okay. And then let's see, I have a whole list of questions. Oh, and I guess similarly, are there any areas, it looked like maybe just lot 10 had some red areas that didn't allow building in them, like the slopes were too great. And I was wondering how that's going to be memorialized. Is that something that's included in the covenant so that the homeowner in the future would know that, part of their lot, that corner lot, part of their lot isn't buildable? Because I could see people wanting to add, outbuildings or sheds or all sorts of things. So
one of the things that's a little bit confusing with development is, so what we require at the subdivision phase is that these lots kind of have a baseline building site, but that doesn't mean that the lots can't be graded in the future. So that lot 10 could certainly be graded to make a larger building site. And they have the ability to do that. But through our building permit process is so what we want to do at the subdivision stage is kind of give this a fairly detailed look and say, do these lots look developable? Kind of a sniff test. But once the subdivision plat is filed, the purchaser of lot 10 can grade it, can modify the slopes and things like that. Through our building permit process, we would make sure that there are erosion controls in place, that the stormwater is managed appropriately, things like that. I can't tell you, it's perfect. I mean, people can modify their lots over time, but there are some checks in place.
And then my last question is maybe slightly off topic, but I think if this gets approved, would be something worth bringing up with the developer. And obviously this is located in the bear buffer zone, which has, has ongoing issues, trying to, minimize negative interactions with wildlife. And so I was wondering if there's any ability during maybe the building permit process to actually put in, make sure that there's infrastructure put in that's maybe less accessible to bears, so that we just mitigate any problems from the get-go and, can really be intentional about it. So
I know the covenants include statements along those lines, kind of recommendations for living with wildlife and that sort of thing. How valuable that really is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I was meaning beyond statements, like you could, already put in maybe trash storage. I don't know what it looks like. I'm not a builder, but something that's a little bit more like actually on the infrastructure side and less on just intent statements. But I think those are all the questions I have. I think it would be useful to add, just based on the planning board discussion, maybe some, because I saw the mention of the trailhead over across the street and overflow parking. And I think it would be worth mentioning that trailhead is being improved, I think, this season. And it could just be added to the presentation so the public is looped in and knows what's coming. So, but yeah, I think that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks. And I have a follow-up question on the bear buffer zone. I was in a presentation some time ago with, and I think Gwen and Mirta were there as well, about the bear buffer zone and efforts to get bear-resistant trash containers. And one of the things that Chad Bauer from Republic Services brought up was in-ground trash. And that's something that's most easily installed with new development. And so I don't know if it's something that Republic can service. I don't know if it's something we can require since we don't have any regulations around that, but I just flag that as a question that, and Dave, I'll follow up with an email with a more specific question, but I'd be interested if there's a way to achieve in-ground trash containers in this project. Next on my list, I've got Jennifer and then Daniel.
Thank you, Jordan. I think that Amber asked a lot of the questions that I had about sort of environmental mitigation and water quality, construction. A lot of those things are also concerns. I am a resident of Ward 1 and I'm a regular user of Greeno Park, regular to the tune of like maybe 4 to 5 times a week. So I'm curious if Parks has had any discussion about the impacts to the park. There are already lots of sort of self-made trails that come down into the park that are on steep slopes. And I'm just curious with this many lots and just the grade of that back section of the property, if Parks has sort of had any conversation around what the impact might look like to an already heavily used park. I actually have a couple other questions and I can keep asking them or we can go one at a time, however it works. What do you think, Jordan?
Dave, do you want to answer that question about parks? And then let's do them one at a time for now.
Yeah, what I can do is I can ask a representative of the Parks and Trails or Parks and Recreation Department to attend the public hearing and they could answer the question better than I.
That would be great. And I think I also would echo a request for someone from transportation. I believe you said his name would be Aaron Wilson or someone, because that particular stretch of Greeno is quite tight. And the reason that there is the trail behind the guardrail is because it's downright like the speed that people can get to on that particular section of road, because it's also kind of going downhill, is quite like it is significant. And as a runner and a biker, like there's a lot of people already, I think, going through Greeno Park to get away from this particular section of road. So I would love to actually have a transportation person come, because I would like to know sort of what the end game is there, because also there's an impact. There's a crosswalk. If you're coming toward town, there's a crosswalk right before the tracks that has like ADA infrastructure. It's not always lined because I think of sort of like snow removal and that sort of thing. But the speed with which people cross right there is significant, and it's often really hard to cross that street. So when we're talking about putting in another crosswalk in a place that's a place where speed can be an issue, I definitely would want to have some conversation around that as well. And I think those are all of my questions.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Dave, do you want to address any of those now, or do you want to kick those all off to Aaron?
I'll just reach out to Parks and see if someone can attend the public hearing. Same thing with Aaron Wilson and his group from transportation.
Okay, and I think it's appropriate if they would attend next week as well, or instead, so that we're not encumbering too much staff time in the evening. I think we could get a list of those questions and have them answered next week. Daniel and then Mirta, and then we're going to go to the developers and members of the public.
Thanks.
Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, what are some of the other zoning options for this site besides R8? Just because when we're looking at trying to add housing units in Missoula, R8 is one of the most restrictive housing zoning measures here. And also making it to where each lot would have to be 8,000 feet. That also plays into the erosion problem and cutting into Greeno Park, et cetera. So I'm just curious, like, if we can look at some other options as well.
Yeah, there are only a few options under the growth policy for rezoning. And just to be clear, the lots don't have to be 8,000 square feet. It's an average lot. So that includes roads and everything. The lots actually are 6,670 to 9,600 square feet. So they vary in size, but let me see. I'm looking for. I'll have to get back to you on the other zoning districts that are available, but it's not very many. Well, let's see here. It is, so it's residential 2-unit townhouse, that's called RT10, that's available. R8, R5.4, which is more dense. It's an average of 5,400 square feet, and RT 5.4, so that's residential 2-unit townhouse. So it's possible to get a little bit more dense. And that was one of the, that's been part of the discussion as well, is could we make it more, make this development more dense? But the developer has something to say about that as well. They make a proposal, and we, I guess, have discussion and say, yes, it seems appropriate, or no, it doesn't, based on the growth policy and other factors. And so I'd be interested to hear their perspective.
Okay, and Jim Nugent has his hand up. Jim, would you like to weigh in as well?
I just wanted to observe that while there might be other zoning options, you can't change horses in midstream. If you're going to change zoning, you've got to go back to square one and start over, so that all the people, the public, from the very beginning of the process for that particular zoning, know what it is and can react to that specific zoning. But you can't get down the road through the process past the planning board and then suddenly change the zoning. So you can if you go back to square one.
Thanks, Jim. Mirta?
I was going to ask that unpopular question of higher density, while I realize that we have to think about context sensitive design and look at the specifics of the site. I just wanted to hear from the developer as to why this density and not greater, given that the land use designation allows from 3 to 11 dwelling units per acre. The actual zoning allows for up to 5.4 dwelling units per acre, and yet development is being proposed as a 3.87 dwelling units per acre. So it's on the lower end of what the land use recommendation for this area is. And, there's been many, and I'm not suggesting that they should change at this point, but I'm curious to know the rationale for the developer's proposal, but also the city's recommendation, because in many instances, a developer has come in with a proposal and the city recommends a more diverse and more intense use of the land, given that we have a land use recommendation that allows for more. So it's just a comment, and I would like to hear a little bit more about the rationale.
Okay, we'll ask the developers to cover that in their presentation. We have a little over 10 minutes left. Can I get a show of hands of members of the public that are not with the development team who would like to provide public comment, just so that I can plan appropriately for use of time? Anyone who at this point who is not part of the development team who would like to provide public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go to Anna Vickers, and Anna, I'm going to add you as a meeting panelist in case you have anything you'd like to present. Okay, here's Anna. Okay, so you should be able to
Hey, can you guys hear me?
hi. Yep, we can.
Hi, sorry. So it makes me kind of rejoin everything. So I appreciate your patience here. Good morning. My name is Anna Vickers. I'm from IMEG. I am here with my colleague Paul Forresting. We've both been working with the developer, and I do have some information. You guys have been asking some great questions. So I'm going to see if I can get my display on the screen. Bear with me just a
Okay.
moment. Let me know if you guys can see this as well.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so it looks like IT fixed my issue. So that's my first win for today. Let's see if I can help mitigate this stuff. So I have some typical information that Dave has already gone over with everyone. I am going to kind of just run over to the slide that I had about density, so I can go ahead and answer questions about that. So bear with me here. So this is something that I kind of marked up about, surrounding density in the area. As you're all aware, we're zoned at that R8, and we've put approximately 3.89 dwelling units per acre on this piece of property. And as you'll see, we have 7.2 dwelling units per acre directly across the street in those apartments, and then about 0.6 dwelling units per acre to the north here, and a bunch of open space, and 5.5 across on the other side of Greeno Park, and 1.8 dwelling units per acre here to the south of us, sort of. And we felt like this 3.8 was kind of a good median point. We weren't really thinking about highest density. When you look at all of the stuff for building permits approval that have been happening lately, a lot of those are multifamily units and townhome units. And so we felt like these single family homes were presenting an option that was available, that wasn't quite as prevalent in what was getting approved recently. And so it was more like trying to hit what we felt like was good for the area, as well as things that were missing from currently in Missoula. So I can completely understand, we all are very concerned about the lack of housing, but it was just more of trying to fit into the neighborhood without like overdevelopment. And also you have just you try to meet with whatever people want. And so I wanted to bring that up. And so it was it wasn't so much trying to put a whole bunch of multiplexes here as much as it was just trying to fit in with the area and not cause too much stress on the neighborhood. The other things I wanted to talk about was we're very aware of the grading in the area, as well as Greeno Park being adjacent. I have some pictures here of the existing home. I wanted to show you, I don't know if any of you have been out to the site, but this red dot right here, that is the existing home. And as you can see, it's right up against the property line. These new houses, we have to build within the setbacks that are required, and I'm going to get to that slide. So as you can see, the red line is the property line, and the blue will be considered what's within the setbacks. And so we have to stay 20 feet off that property line to kind of allow for a space for the grading and drainage protection, as well as a space off the park. So you probably actually won't see these houses from Greeno Park as prevalently as you see the houses that are there, because a lot of them were built before the zoning setbacks. And that's, like Dave had emphasized, we have to do these geotechnical reports, and grading has to be done to protect those lots. And we're going to provide swales as well as dry well sumps to try to protect the runoff and not do any harms to the environment. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up. And this is all, speculative in regards to, I would assume most people would build towards the front of a lot to create a backyard. So it's going to also provide that space from the park as well. So I just wanted to bring that point up as well. And the other questions that I heard about the Bayer information, we're happy to explore that information with Republic Services. We're not close to that idea, and adding that kind of stuff into the covenants is something that can be done at final plat time. And we're definitely happy to explore that as you guys brought up some really great points. And so I just wanted to also bring that to your attention. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have, so just let me know, and I can stop sharing my screen as well.
Okay, thank you for the information. I can connect you on the trash question to the group that was previously discussing that. I think the in-ground trash storage or trash receptacles are actually really an amenity for new development as well. So I think it's something definitely worth exploring. We have just a couple minutes. I have Gwen Jones next.
Right. Thank you, Jordan. Thanks, Anna, for the information, and Dave also. So I just wanted to reiterate an issue that Heidi West had brought up, which was the fact that all of these homes up the Rattlesnake, many of them over time, there have been issues of where their property ends and where Greeno Park begins. And I hate to be sitting in a situation where we're creating a new development and there isn't something in place so that at least with this area, we don't have that issue 20 or 30 years from now, as there's kind of the creep as people, if there's an area where it appears like, oh, this is a great place to build a chicken coop or whatever. So it sounds like there is not a tool in place, but I just wanted to put it out. I feel like somehow there should be some kind of demarcation so that, if we don't learn from the past, what are we doing? So let's try. Somehow we should do it better, because I know that issue takes up a huge amount of park resources on an ongoing basis. So I'd love to avoid it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Anna, do you want to take that?
Sure, and I can completely understand the concern there. So when we go in for these new subdivisions, we do have to put in some survey pins as well as like flags to mark the boundary. I will kind of quickly show my screen. I can completely get where you're coming from. We're not opposed to any sort of like fencing that would delineate that. Obviously, it's hard to try to enforce those kind of things, but there is kind of a topography separation as well from the property line into Greeno Park. And I'm going to kind of show you that. I wonder if it'll let me reshare. Sorry, you would think I'd be better at this, but I'm still kind of learning everything. So I'm going to go, actually, this is the perfect slide. This point right here, the red line, there's a or a very graphic drop off in the geography. And I took a couple of pictures from the park. So if you can look right here, the existing home is right on the property line. And so all of this area just won't be encroached upon just based on general topography there as well. So not only will homeowners have to get approval from the building department to put their home exactly where they say that they're going to put it, and also have those geotechnical reports that support being in the right location, we'll also have our survey pins there as well to kind of show and guide what the property line's on. And we're not closed off to the idea of maybe requiring any sort of fencing. We can definitely discuss that with the developer as well. So I just kind of wanted to point out the topography definitely will protect for that, and the setbacks as well. But yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. One last call. Would anyone from the public like to provide comment on this today? There will be opportunities as well at the public hearing and on Monday, as well as our meeting next week. Okay, seeing none, we have 1 minute left. And so just quickly, Mirta and Heidi. Mirta first.
Yeah, I'm not gonna try to, beat this dead horse at this point, because this is before us, but I just wanted to point and clarify that, when we talk about higher density, we're not necessarily talking about apartment buildings. We've been focused on the missing middle as an opportunity for diverse income levels to enter the housing market. And so I just see this would have been a great opportunity to offer that, rather than single family homes that are, currently would benefit from transit and being within walking distance to a lot of amenities, including downtown. So I just want to point out that when we talk about higher density, it's not only apartment buildings, it's the missing middle. Thanks.
Okay. It is 10:45. I recognize that Dave has to take off here. So Dave, I think we'll continue on for just a couple more minutes. we'll see you next week. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Yep, you too. Heidi and then Kristen.
Hi, so I'm still on the topic of the Greeno Park encroachment. And I think the topography alone often doesn't deter people. I can think of instances where decks have been cantilevered out over the slope. If you're walking along the trail, you can see some pretty creative ways that the park has been encroached on. So if this gets approved, I think putting in maybe additional pins might be a good idea, just so as properties transfer. I think things just get lost and moved and just slowly progress. I don't think it's usually a ill intent, or it just happens. And so maybe that way it's easier for people to resurvey in the future, or it's just more obvious. Stakes can move, people make mistakes. I think if there's some extra pins, I think that would be maybe a little better.
Thanks, Heidi. Okay, final remarks or questions go to Kristen.
Thank you. I had to step out for a minute, and I apologize, because I don't know if this was covered, but do we know if any of these houses are going to be set as permanently affordable?
Anna, would you like to address that?
No, not at this point.
Thanks. All right, this has been very informative, and we're out of time, so I'm going to wrap us up here, but thank you to staff and the development team for the presentation. This will be back for public hearing on Monday with final consideration on April 11th. So thanks, everyone. We'll be adjourned.